back down below 400. So regardless, so I for all his heroics, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, I still don't think the Marlins are a playoff team unless they add like 2 more Luisas Arraez to the lineup.
Well, there you go. Jon Tayler. And
Yes.
happier news, Elly De La Cruz made his debut.
Yeah.
He's going to be fun. He's good for baseball.
Yo, he and O'Neal Cruz need to team up for some kind of duo act, like some kind of barnstorming duo act during the offseason where they just go around like hitting balls a million miles and like throwing balls like 100 miles. That would be like, it's crazy thing O'Neal Cruz, who just feels like such a physical like anomaly, that the Reds are like, okay, we have that, but somehow like taller.
Yes.
Like it makes absolutely no sense. What are they putting in the water down in the Dominican Republic, man? Like those guys are
6'5", right? Let's see. Yes, 6'5".
Elly De La Cruz is 6'5", throws 100 miles an hour, hits 100 miles an hour, and runs with the same rough sprint speed as Trey Turner. That's insane. That is an insane combination of abilities. That makes absolutely no sense. I think it's kind of equivalent. Do you remember that moment? And I'm kind of speaking vaguely here because I'm obviously not a football guy, but it felt like there was a moment in the last 10 years in the NFL when the level of physical freaks just started like exponentially increasing. When guys like DK Metcalf or maybe not Aaron Donald, because Aaron Donald is just a thing unto himself, but like those dudes who could just easily like pivot between like linebacker and defensive end and just can play with one hand on the dirt or just standing up, or those wide receivers who are built like strong safeties but also somehow can run like 4.240s. Like I think baseball is basketball, I think Victor Wembanyama is obviously the biggest example there, someone who's just a pure genetic freak. But and maybe this is just true of all professional sports at this point, but like it just feels like the level of guys in baseball who can do things that just shouldn't really be possible. Obviously led by Ohtani, but now including guys like Cruz and De La Cruz and De La Cruz, and other dudes like that. It just feels like we're at a real point where this is now starting to become like more commonplace that these dudes just come up here with these utterly bonkers tools. But I don't know. I mean, it is really cool though. I'm very.
The Reds are awesome. The Reds are kind of fun now. That's
what I'm saying. Like my mini take inside all of that was that if there's an NL Central team that I think is a genuine dark horse playoff contender, leaving the Brewers aside since they're on top of the division, I would rather put my money on the Reds than any of the other 4 teams in the NL Central. I think
they have a 2.9% playoff odd right now.
They do, and I think I would give them probably no better than 10% ultimately, because I think there's still a lot of particularly the rotation and the bullpen is just not very good. Yeah. But there's a lot of really good young talent there. There's De La Cruz, there's Matt McClain, there's Spencer Steer, there's Jonathan India having his bounce back, there's TJ Friedel, there's Jake Fraley, there's Andrew Abbott, who they just called up, there's Alexis Diaz, who has been completely unhittable as their closer. I mean, it's actually kind of funny to think there's going to be a real debate as to who the Reds all-star is this season, because they have a lot of genuinely good options. I mean, I think I'd probably end up
India, right?
It's either India or Diaz, I would think, and it's mostly just going to depend on roster construction, whether or not the NL wants another infielder or a closer. But regardless, like there are some really, really good players on that team, really, really good young players too. And I think that's just really worth noting for guys like. We know that De La Cruz obviously is what, 21 years old. He's a tiny baby. But I just want to go through some of the ages for these guys on the Reds. Just note, like this is not a one. Like Steer is 25, India is 26, Fraley is 28, Friedel is 27. Tyler Stevenson, who I haven't mentioned, in part because he's pretty much a DH at this point, but still has some thump in his bat, 26. McClain is 23. De La Cruz obviously is 21. The pitching staff, Hunter Green I can't believe I forgot to mention Hunter Green in all of this. Hunter Green is 23. Nick Lodolo, who unfortunately is hurt, is 25. Diaz is 26. Andrew Abbott is 24. Brandon Williamson, who's been pretty good for them as himself a former top prospect, 25. There is lots and lots of under 30 talent already on this roster. And then you start looking at their prospect list too. Just, going by the prospect list we put together over at Fangraphs back in early January, top 2 on there were De La Cruz and Steer. But then you've also got Noelvi Marte, the big piece who came over in the Luis Castillo trade, who's currently in Double-A. 21 years old. Cam Collier, I think their first round pick in last year's draft, 18. Edwin Arroyo is number 3 on our list, is 19. Chase Petty, who they got for Sonny Gray from Minnesota, number 6 on that list, he's 20. There's McLean at number 7 is 23. Connor Phillips, who's in Double-A and is probably going to be a good relief arm, is I think just turned 22. There again, this is a system with a lot of talent. You go by our Fangraphs future value designations. You've got 4 guys at a 50 future value or plus. De La Cruz obviously at a 60. Petty at a 45 plus. McLean and Phillips, Williamson and Michael Ciani all 45 or better. 45 or better indicates pretty much a regular. 45 is a regular. 45 plus is regular with all-star ceiling. 50 is pretty much regular all-star, and a 60 plus, a guy like De La Cruz, is a dude who's going to get MVP votes at some point in the future. At least that's our... And for another guy I forgot to mention, Christian Encarnacion Strand, who's been tearing up AAA and is a realistic option for this team at first base if Joey Votto comes back and just doesn't look right. So again, tons and tons of young talent on this roster, on the farm system. It's it doesn't, in my mind, make up for how Cincinnati has gotten to this point, which is to say by being as craven and just fan unfriendly as humanly possible. The Castellinis, I think, are still horrific owners who should be nowhere near this team, because I think if you're a Reds fan looking to the future, you're feeling good about it, but you're also probably worrying, is this ownership group going to build around this group when the time comes, or are they just going to say, well, these are the guys, and if they don't do it on their own, too bad. I worry about that, but I don't want to rain on a parade at the moment. So
put a bow on it is because the Pirates, people forget, had this amazing start, and obviously injuries and other stuff got in the way, and they've fallen off. But I wonder, because we're both pretty optimistic about where both rebuilds are headed now to this point. I don't think it works out for both. It rarely happens like that when the small market, low spending teams they put it all together. Who would you bet on more likely to make this leap from bad to okay to good to maybe great over the next 2 to 3 years? Would you bet on it being the Reds, who went to an NL Central or 2 in the next 2 to 3 years, or would you bet on the Pirates? Because I don't think it works well for both.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think the reality is it just depends which farm system you like more, because neither of these teams, I think, is going to be involved in free agency over the next couple of years to the degree that they're actually adding the pieces necessary.
But at least we've seen it a little bit with Cincinnati.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing it more with Cincinnati, and I think I like Cincinnati's long-term bets a little better. I think part of that is just the Pirates seem to have had some genuine trouble getting pitchers to make that adjustment from the minors to the majors. We're seeing that. We've seen it with Rancy Contreras, who got absolutely demolished today by the A's. We've seen it with Luis Ortiz, who they called up earlier in the season and has not pitched particularly well. Quinn Priester, who granted has not made it to the majors, but probably the next guy that they're looking to try on in that group. And there's also just, for me, I think most of what the Pirates, most of that Pirates group is already there. The guys that they're really waiting on are, in particular, Endy Rodriguez and Henry Davis, one of whom will have to come off catcher. And eventually, but quite a ways away, Termarr Johnson, who's probably... our ETA on him is 2028. He's not even 19 years old yet. He won't turn 19. Actually, he'll turn 19 in 4 days. And who is currently hitting 260, 421, 375 at A-ball, which, granted, for a 19-year-old at A-ball, that's pretty good. But that's still a ways away from the majors. And I think, even if you think 2028 is too pessimistic, realistically, 2025, I think, is the fastest you might see Termarr Johnson. Whereas... with Cincinnati, I think you've already seen Steer and De La Cruz come up. You've already seen McLean come up. You've already seen Williamson come up. You're going to see Encarnacion Strand, I think, before the end of the year. I think there's a pretty good shot Noelvi Marte and Chase Petty are on this team by this time next year. Petty is currently an advanced A-ball and pitching very well, albeit only in 16 innings. Noelvi Marte, as I said, is in Double-A currently, hitting 293, 366, 484 as a 21-year-old. So, honestly, there's a chance Marte might get a September call-up if he keeps hitting at that rate. I think the future for the Reds, I think their prospects are a little better, and I think they're all closer to the majors in a way that they can make a bigger impact than what Pittsburgh has. I think the error bars are probably bigger on Cincinnati, rather, whereas I think Pittsburgh is a little more stable, but I think Pittsburgh's stability is a team where at their best they're probably going to be somewhere in that low 80s win projection. I think Cincinnati, with the right additions and the right development, can get higher than that, because I think particularly when you have guys like De La Cruz and Marte, who have such ludicrous physical tools, the ceiling is just that much higher.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say it's the Reds who break through among this group. And sorry, Pirates fans. We want it to be both, but I would
love it to be both. And I think I think what especially gives me pause, again, is the ownership situations for both. Neither the Castellinis nor Bob Nutting have shown any inclination to spend as needed. There's no reason that the Reds can't be better than they are even right now. There's after an offseason where the most they did was go and get Will Myers, who's probably going to get DFA'd before the All-Star break at this rate.
Awful. He's
been very, very bad. And again, that was probably the biggest signing Cincinnati made all offseason. Looking back at their major transactions from the winter, they signed here the guys: Luke Maile, Silvino Bracco, Kurt Casale, Will Myers, Luke Weaver, Derek Law, Chad Pinder, who I don't think is on the roster anymore. That's it. They really didn't do anything this offseason. Not even really much in the way of trades. The only trade they made was getting Will Benson from Cleveland, and Will Benson is a perfectly fine fifth outfielder, but I don't think anyone's idea. Oh, sorry, they also traded Blake Sable to the Giants, but I think Sable was a Rule 5 pick, so that doesn't really matter. Point being, there's a lot of room for Cincinnati to do more. They did nothing this offseason.
It does make me a little bit nervous where it's like the Jonathan India, are they going to keep him past the deadline stuff? That scares me a little bit. Where it's I think he's a core guy. Stop overthinking this. Like, don't move Jonathan.
Well, the interesting thing for the Reds there is going to be how do they figure out the infield mix between De La Cruz, India, McLean, eventually Marte, possibly Steer, although they moved him out to an outfield corner with De La Cruz playing third last night and McLean at shortstop and India at second. I mean, I think ultimately it probably just shakes out to India at second, or McLean at short, Marte at third, or not Marte, De La Cruz at third, and just kind of reconfigure as necessary if Marte comes up. Maybe McLean is a guy who could work as some kind of super utility bat who can play in the outfield corners as well. But, I mean, the outfield's crowded too with Steer, Friedel, and Fraley, and I guess if you want to include Nick Senzel, but I think it's probably okay to let go of Nick Senzel at this point. Really, I mean, the only real space where I think the Reds at this point in the lineup where the Reds really are like, oh, this is not working out, is probably first base, and that a lot of that's just going to depend on how Votto comes back. And again, even if Votto comes back and it's just nowhere near Joey Votto, they've got Encarnacion Strand down in AAA. They can call him up and see what they can do. So, it's going to be interesting how the Reds try to figure out that logjam that they have in terms of there are now too many good players coming up, but that's a really good problem to have. It is never a bad thing to have too many good players, because the other side of that is, well, hey, maybe now you can trade some of those guys to get some help on the rotation.
Yeah,
because I think that's another space where the Reds really do need that help right now. I mean, that, like I said, that is probably the weakest part of the team right now, aside from the non-Alexis Diaz parts of the bullpen, I would say. I mean, part of the problem is a guy like, one, that Graham Ashcraft has taken an enormous step back from last year, and that Nick Lodolo is currently hurt. But yeah, actually, I'm going to call the rotation a bigger problem than the bullpen. You can figure out a bullpen unless your name is Dave Dombrowski. The rotation right now being Hunter Green, followed by Luke Weaver, followed by Ben Lively. Even though Weaver and Lively in particular has pitched quite well, Weaver's been very bad. They need help there. And I think that is, and calling Abbott up is one part of it, but maybe part of that solution too is taking from that stockpile of prospects you have and seeing who out there has an arm that is young and cost controllable, that wants, that could use hitting help.
There you go. Jon Tayler,
yes.
Team Spotlight, number 1, the Chicago White Sox, who might win the AL Central now.
I mean, it's not impossible because the AL Central is pointless. It's a damn garbage dump. Sure, why not? I mean,
they're playing better baseball over the last few weeks.
I don't think they could have played worse baseball than what they were, though. That's the thing. Like, they're playing better in large part because, yeah, they literally could not do worse. I mean,
yeah,
their record in the month of April was 7-20. Like, they literally could not have done worse than that. I mean,
yeah.
Even going 19-14 since then, which I should note, 19-14 is a .575 winning percentage, or a 93 win pace over a full season. that still has them 8 games below 500. Like they